All right, guys, here we go. Topic 74 to 76, World War II. All right, so we started off here. Um, we were in Europe. The Blitz happened. Germans trying to take over. Really, everywhere's fallen to Germany for the most part of any note, with the exception of Britain, helped out by the fact they're an island, so Hitler tries to take it with the Blitz. Overall, not very successful in the long run, and it weakens Germany's air force. The Pacific, the Battle of the Coral Sea turned Japan back from taking over Africa, or excuse me, not Africa, but Australia, New Zealand. And so that's where we're at right now. Allied strategy. Let's take out Europe first. They're geographically more important in Europe. They're, Britain, France, Russia, all those countries are right there around Germany, so that's the biggest threat. Whereas Japan's on the other side of the world and much more, isolated, so therefore much less of a threat. So let's send all of our resources, armies, etc., and take out Germany first. The Europe first strategy. European theater, war in the Atlantic. You've got U-boats targeting ships. You've got ships that are being sunk with American soldiers, American sailors, etc. You're going to have convoys put in place where traveling ships are surrounded. Radar, sonar are going to be used. Depth charges, trying to, hit those submarines underwater, find them, etc. So lots of stuff going on in the Atlantic here. Operation Barbarossa. If we recall, Hitler and Stalin had an agreement, the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact, where they weren't going to fight each other. Hitler breaks that, invades the Soviet Union with Operation Barbarossa. Millions of Axis troops invade. It's arguably the largest land invasion in history, at least as far as this goes, this war. They move towards Leningrad. It's strategically important for the heart. It's a heart kind of thing, emotional boost for them. Moscow's capital city in Stalingrad has oil. Kill and capture a lot of Soviets. The problem is they start a little bit too late as Germany is whirling through. Winter eventually sets in. You can see the kind of three-pronged attack there, and it goes pretty well up until the winter starts hitting in. Once that happens, the tides start turning, and at Stalingrad, the Germans get pushed back ultimately. They surrender at Stalingrad, and this is kind of the turning point in the war for Europe. From this point on, Germany's no longer going to be truly expanding just like they had been up to this point. They're kind of getting rolled back a little bit now, and Germany's kind of fighting a semi-defensive war at this point. North Africa, you got Operation Torch. Germans and Italians primarily down there. The British have been fighting there for a couple of years early in the war. The Americans are getting involved there as well. Let's try and get North Africa taken back, or the Allies are thinking. If they can do that, then they can start crossing the Mediterranean Sea and push for an invasion of Italy. So the big thing, when they do win, the Allies, they're going to force out the Germans, which means now they can start moving on to Italy. Italy's arguably a softer target than the Germans, so let's go ahead and get them taken out. It is also General Rommel that's kind of the guy running the show for the Germans. He's a great general, just happens to be on the losing side in this case. Eisenhower and Patton, two major leaders for the Allies. Both of them are American. Eisenhower is the supreme Allied commander in Europe. He's going to have control over all of the forces in Europe, no matter what nationality they are. He kind of oversees Operation Torch and the Operation Overlord D-Day invasion as well. Patton's this tough, persistent general. He's going to fight primarily in North Africa. That's his big claim to fame. Does some other stuff in Europe too. But he's tough as nails, persistent, etc. What do the Allies want? Why? They want unconditional surrender. They don't want to have any terms. It's what we say, and that's what goes. And no conditions. You don't want to give legitimacy to whatever Hitler is doing. Stalin also wants a Western Front opened up. He and the Soviets are bearing the brunt of the force over on the Eastern Front, so they'd like a second front opened up, so it takes a little bit of pressure on them. Although some of the other allies are arguably not so quick to do that because they don't necessarily totally agree with everything Stalin does, so they maybe want to let him bleed a little bit first. It's probably going to be a point of contention after the war. Italy's going to get invaded here in 1943. They move into Sicily. The Allies do, and they eventually push the Italians back. September of 1943, Italy surrenders. Mussolini's going to be executed, and then the next couple of years, you're going to see the Allies pushing German forces who are still in Italy, pushing them back towards Germany. Bombs, you can see here, saturation bombing, carpet bombings. The planes are going to be flying high over the city, so they're out of anti-aircraft range. But with that, accuracy goes down, so they just start carpet bombing or saturation bombing. just unloading bomb after bomb after bomb on a concentrated area. This is going to increase civilian casualties as well, although it is going to be an effective tactic here. So, with that said, though, you are going to hit a lot of military targets too, and the goal of this is to kind of soften up Germany, take out their war production facilities primarily. If you can't produce what the armies need to fight, it's going to make them weaker, and this is going to just kind of soften up the defenses for an eventual invasion of Germany. You got the Tuskegee Airmen, an all African American fighter pilot group, fighting in Europe here. They allegedly did not lose a single bomber to combat. Probably not quite accurate. They did lose a handful, but the legend goes that they were so good that they didn't, lose anybody. But this is really important because it does show that African Americans are just as capable or more capable than white people in this case. So it's a push for equality here. It's just pretty nice to see. Moving over to the Pacific Theater here a little bit. Turning point is the Battle of Midway. Torpedo planes, dive bombers for the Americans. They sink several Japanese aircraft carriers. And since we're fighting in the ocean here, the aircraft carriers are very important because they allow aircraft planes to move, to different locations and then take off from there, thus saving fuel, thus increasing their range ultimately. When this happens, Japan can't really easily replace the aircraft carriers and the planes that they lost due to lack of resources and so forth. So this is a key turning point in the Pacific because Japan is no longer going to really have a shot to dominate the Pacific. Guadalcanal also takes place 42 to 43. Nasty, nasty battle. If you guys want to know more about it, check it out. It's a really fascinating thing. Jungle combat, night attacks, all that sort of stuff. Island hopping we'll come back to later, but it's basically a strategy in the Pacific where the Americans are going to incrementally in small steps move towards Japan. They're not going to hit every island, though, because you don't need to. If it's not strategically important, probably avoid that island. There's Midway right in the middle there, kind of ironically named a little bit. POWs, they're going to be captured in the U.S. It's not just like this is Japanese Americans, which we'll get to. Germans, Italians, Japanese Americans in particular. Homefront here, we talked about war bonds. Government needs money, so they're persuading people to, hey, buy this bond, give us money now, and we'll pay you back with interest later. Rationing, you only get so much of something per week kind of idea. That way there's enough for soldiers fighting. Victory gardens, grow your own food. That will, again, allow people to contribute to the war, more food for everybody. Office of War Information is going to kind of control how the war is run. Double V campaign, A. Philip Randolph kind of pushes this a little bit. Victory over fascism in Europe, but also victory for civil rights a little bit here at home. Let's push for that a little bit. Executive Order 8802 is pushed by Randolph. FDR kind of gives in a little bit. It basically states that any government job can have no real discrimination in it. So you got to hire anyone who's the best fit. This is going to increase worker rates here. You're going to see more workers getting into jobs, which is kind of nice to help produce things for the war. Women's roles are going to change a little bit. Guys are getting drafted in the military. Who's going to step up and do the jobs? Well, a lot of women are going to. Secretarial clerical work, that's also going to increase as well, the white-collar jobs. So what are the women going to do with the children, though? Well, the government's got a solution to that. They're going to pump a lot of money into daycare centers so women can go do those heavy industry jobs and those clerical secretarial jobs. So a lot of money going into child care so women can go do this and contribute to the war. It's going to eventually help push for women's greater autonomy and equality over time. Just talked about Executive Order 8802, so we're not going to really touch on that here a little bit. But December 8th, 1941, right after Pearl Harbor happens, Japanese assets are frozen. So this is kind of the first step towards internment a little bit here. Executive Order 9066 is issued. No civil rights for Japanese Americans anymore. This is where you're going to see a lot of Japanese Americans, over 100,000, are pushed from military areas where things could be sabotaged theoretically and stuff like that. They're going to be put into military areas where they're going to be watched over. The families are going to get about 1 week notice before they get moved. Internment, they're basically going to be prisoners for the duration of the war. You got the Nisei and the Issei. The Nisei are U.S. Born Japanese Americans whose parents are probably from Japan. Japanese immigrants are the first wave coming over are the Issei, so they have direct ties to Japan. So you can see through these pictures here, there are some definitely racist sentiments in the first one. People giving up their businesses, their homes, really their entire livelihoods. It's a little bit chaotic at times. military type lifestyle, and then it's kind of Spartan like, bare, not a lot of just, not a lot of fun stuff going on. Separations here, medical care given, etc. Korematsu of the United States. Fred Korematsu here, he says that you can't do this to me. He resists the arrest, so he gets put into a concentration camp. Even though the army said, go do this, he resists, so he gets arrested. Goes to the Supreme Court. He's like, you can't do this. This is all based on race. The Supreme Court says, no, we can't do this. This is justified. It's not about race. It's about wartime security, thus making it okay. So this is the thing that says Executive Order 9066 is acceptable and internment is acceptable. 40 years later, President Reagan in the 80s is going to officially apologize for this and offer $20,000 to each survivor. And they basically admit, hey, this is done. Racial motivations, war hysteria, and just leaders didn't do a good job during the time. We watch this a little bit. Conditions aren't always the best. I mean, they're not terrible, but they're also not, luxury hotels, as you can see there. Japanese Americans do contribute pretty heavily, though, to the war. 442nd Regimental Combat Team, mostly Nisei Japanese Americans. They fight in Italy, and they, sacrifice a lot. Purple Hearts, Medals of Honor. Very, very honorable, very, very brave group. Contribute a lot to the war effort. Migration-wise, a lot of African Americans are going to move to the north here, looking for those industrial jobs. That's going to leave a shortage of farm workers, which is partially going to be filled by access prisoners, but also the Bracero program is going to come in for 20 plus years here, which is going to invite Mexican workers to come in and work in the U.S. This is going to exacerbate tensions, though, and what you're going to see is riots. You've got a bunch of black people moving to the north. You've got Mexicans coming in from the south. That's going to exacerbate tensions between the races, and you get race riots, particularly in Detroit, where people die. One kind of fringe benefit of this, though, is it does push for civil rights equality. A lot of African Americans in particular join civil rights groups, so that is a nice outcome of this, although it's not exactly a pretty thing that happens for that to come about, though. Zoot Suit riots primarily motivated probably by race here. American sailors, they get tired of dealing with these Zoot Suiters. You can see the pictures there. They start attacking Mexican Americans in Los Angeles. A mob does it at one point. 500 people, attacked, and the police actually come in and arrest the Latinos, allegedly for their protection. It's a criminal offense to wear a zoot suit. So this is, not in a pretty time in our history here, but it does happen. Tehran Conference is the big three. You got Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill. What do we want to do after the war? How are we going to defeat Germany? Well, let's open up a second front, which is going to lead to Operation Overlord, led by Eisenhower. Planning the invasion, they create an entire fake army because the French are thinking that, hey, the Germans are thinking France is going to be invaded at Calais at the top of the screen here. So the Allies create an entire fake army to distract from the actual landing sites. Utah and Omaha are key beaches here. The Americans are on those. British and Canadians are on the other beaches. 150,000 plus Allied troops, June 6, 1944, 20,000 plus vehicles, paratroopers, the whole shebang, and D-Day happens. Nice thing about this, it is successful. It's a very bloody, gruesome time, but it is successful. Paris and France get liberated, and Germany is fighting a two-front war. Battle of the Bulge comes around here a little bit. Hitler's got his last gasp here. He pushes a line into the line of Allied forces. Eventually, though, the Germans run out of resources, and it's Hitler's last gasp. After this, he's truly going to be fighting a defensive war only. Meanwhile, FDR dies. He gets elected for a term and dies. Harry Truman becomes president. What's going to go on now? Well, what does he do with the bomb, etc.? Timeline here. Victory in Europe. VE Day. Mussolini executed in Italy. Hitler and his wife commit suicide in a Berlin bunker. And Germany surrenders unconditionally. VE Day is over. And now it's time to focus solely on Japan and winning the Pacific Theater.